Be it ordained and enacted by authorities of this Parliament, that all and every of the statutes heretofore made in the reign of the late Queen Elizabeth against Jesuits, seminary priests, and other priests, deacons, religious, and ecclesiastical persons ordained by the See of Rome, together with all those made in the said late Queen's time against any manner of recusant, shall be put in due and exact execution. Those words are from an opening preamble to an Act of Parliament signed into law by James VI of Scotland, First of England, in 1604. Its full title was An Act for the Due Execution of the Statutes Against Jesuits, Seminary Priests, Recusants, etc., 1603. This new act reaffirmed some of the most brutal and the most hated of the anti-Catholic laws that had been passed by James's predecessor, Queen Elizabeth I. It was the ultimate proof that the reign of King James was not to be a new age of Catholic toleration, but of religious persecution. Welcome to Journey Through Time. I'm Sarah Churchwell.
And I'm David Olusoga, and this is the second of our 4 episodes on the Gunpowder Plot of 1605, an event that 420 years later, people will be marking on Bonfire Night, on Guy Fawkes Night.
It is, as we were saying last time, a national event that is kind of a strangely unlikely choice out of all of the things that could be commemorated of the momentous things that happened in the 16th and 17th centuries in Britain.
Yeah, it's a survivor from a kind of age of religious war, but it is kind of quite strange. I mean, the Guy Fawkes being burnt on the bonfire, I mean, that's kind of dying out, but it was really strong when I was a kid growing up. And remember, that's an effigy of a human being, a Catholic, who was executed for treason for his crimes in 1606. We ended the last episode talking about this kind of powerful force of hope that had slowly built up among England's Catholic minority, the recusants, the hardliners who will not compromise with the new Church of England and the Protestant faith. They are beginning to realize that the reign of King James, the First of England, Sixth of Scotland, is not going to be an age of Catholic toleration. It's going to be a continuation of Catholic oppression. That reign begins formally on the 25th of July, 1603. There is a coronation. It is a subdued coronation because, once again, this is the 17th century, plague is in town. London is under a sort of outbreak of plague. There's been a previously quite bad outbreak of plague in 1601, so people are nervous. So it's kind of, things are scaled down. There is a kind of brief honeymoon period when Catholics are able to just hold on to those hopes for just a little bit longer. He is seen to do some things that you can read, if you want to, as positive signs. He brings some men who are known to be Catholics into his court. These are sometimes called crypto-Catholics. Everyone knows they're not Protestant. They're playing along with it, and everyone pretends, is happy just to sort of not ask questions. He also halts the collection of fines for recusancy. This is fines for not attending your local Protestant service. There's some good signs, but there's also lots of mixed messages. The big bid that he makes to try to address the religious crisis of the age was the Hampton Court Conference. He's got extreme Protestants on one side. He's got the recusant Catholics on the other. He's trying to find common ground, even within the Protestant church. Really, the only lasting achievement of the Hampton Court Conference is, I think, one of the most famous books in the English language.
Yeah, so this is the conference that will ultimately produce the King James Bible. The importance of the King James Bible is actually really kind of hard to overstate, isn't it? I mean, the key here is that it is the first authoritative Bible in English, and it is meant to draw together these key Protestant traditions into one English Bible. Now, there had been previous Bibles in English, which had actually caused all kinds of trouble.
Yeah, and multiple different translations circulating at the same time.
Many of them become underground religious texts at various points because they become prohibited or not prohibited, and they all have important political implications. And so here James says, I'm going to have an authorized, official English version of the Bible. And along with Shakespeare, who of course is writing at the same moment, I think much more of modern English comes out of the King James Bible, and as it does out of Shakespeare, than a lot of people realize.
Yeah, so many of the phrases we use on a daily basis.
So like the writing on the wall, or the skin of my teeth, or the apple of his eye, the salt of the earth.
I mean, the blind leading the blind, white as snow, a two-edged sword, all of these coming.
Fight the good fight, which is very apt for the story that we're telling today. So the ways in which it shapes the language, the ways in which it shapes the culture are immense. And then it also shapes politics in really important ways. But none of this is going to mollify Catholics because they're not interested in an English Bible. They still want services in Latin. That's part of what the fight is over. So to actually say, well, here, we're going to give you an English Bible. Well, you still want priests giving your Mass in Latin. You're going to say that is not the solution that we're looking for.
Yeah. The situation for Catholics while the King James Bible is being devised and translated, the situation gets worse because in 1603, there are two plots discovered against the king and thwarted. They are called the main conspiracy and the byplot, because there was the main one and then the other smaller plot.
Byplot just means like secondary plot.
Yeah,
I genuinely did not realize that.
Yeah.
I thought somebody named By must have been involved in it. It's the like a by
there
road.
were two associated plots. One was the main one was the secondary one. Yeah,
You'd be so sad if you were a plotter and you were just the by plot.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, what? I'm not even a main plot.
Well, to be honest, it was such a rubbish plot. It deserves to be a secondary plot. The plan was to imprison the king in the Tower of London and force concessions out of him. That was it. I mean, it was not.
It's not a great plot.
Yeah, it was not. There's not multiple layers to it. It makes the Gunpowder Plot seem really sophisticated. The main conspiracy planned to kill the king and his heir and put his cousin, Lady Arabella Stuart, on the throne. A woman deemed to be or thought to be more sympathetic to Catholics. Interestingly, one of the conspirators in the main conspiracy was the explorer Walter Raleigh. He was imprisoned in the Tower of London for 13 years for his part in the plot.
Now, I think a lot of people will know that Raleigh was arrested and imprisoned, but may not realize that how closely connected it was to the Gunpowder Plot.
I guess the other big frustration in those early years of King James's reign for Catholics is that the religious divisions are not his main priority. He comes to power of a nation of 800,000 people, which is the population of Scotland, and he inherits a nation of 4 million. Vastly wealthier, far bigger nation. When he makes his procession south to London from Edinburgh, he's astonished at the wealth of England. And his big project is to unify his two kingdoms, because all that's happened in 1603 is a personal union, a union of crowns. England and Scotland remain two separate nations.
Just sharing a ruler.
They share a monarch. That is it. And his dream is of creating a British state. And that's what he's arguing about in Parliament. He tries to persuade Parliament. He uses this kind of wonderful 17th century language when he speaks in Parliament about union. He says, God, hath he not made us all in one island, compassed with one sea, and of itself by nature indivisible? He describes himself as the husband, and the whole isle is my lawful wife. And he appeals to the MPs and says, should I be a polygamist? Can I have two wives, these two kingdoms? It's kind of wonderful language, but it doesn't get him anywhere. The best he can get out of it is toleration, really, of a new title, King of Great Britain, though even that is kind of only, barely allowed. He's not allowed to sign laws, the King of Great Britain. He's still the King of England and Scotland.
So it's sort of a made-up title that they give him to placate him, but it has no legal force.
And he gets on with trying to kind of make the imagery of this British state that, of course, is not to come into existence for another century, until the beginning of the 18th century. So he kind of starts designing a new flag, what is to be the Union flag. There are his 6 designs in the National Library of Scotland, the actual bit of paper that was presented to him with these 6 designs. It is wonderful. Go and look at it. Yeah. Some of them less successful than others, but they're beautiful. And he creates coins that describe him as the King of Britain, but it's all kind of paper. It's all on paper. It's all kind of surface stuff. He doesn't get anywhere with it.
But it also bespeaks how far ahead of his time he was, though. As you say, it's going to take a century for that to happen, but that's the vision. Yeah. He has the vision. That
vision is far more important to James in those first months and years of his reign than the complaints of Catholics. And then in March 1604, he gives a speech to Parliament in which he is clear that all of the hopes of Catholics are not to be honoured. He expresses his own personal hostility to the Catholic faith. He says it will only be tolerated as it is if Catholics don't grow, if their numbers don't increase. And then in the summer of 1604, he gives royal assent to the act that you read part of the preamble to at the beginning, the Jesuit Act. The hated anti-Catholic laws passed under Elizabeth were to be reaffirmed. all of the things that Elizabeth had passed that Catholics had hoped might disappear, might be taken off their shoulders when she died, that none of them were to go. And in some ways it gets worse, because not only were the fines for recusancy, for not going to the Protestant church services, to continue, and not only were Catholic priests still to be hunted down, a new clause of that act said that Catholics couldn't even now send their children to colleges and schools on the continent to be educated. They would face a £100 fine, an enormous sum in 1603, if they were caught sending their children to be educated in their faith.
It's one thing to say that you can't practice Catholicism here. It's another thing to say you can't practice it anywhere.
Yeah.
You're a subject of
you
this
can't
nation.
send your children to be educated in the faith of your ancestors, even abroad. The new regime is acting very like the old one.
Mm. And at the same time, English Catholics have also been looking abroad for other kinds of hopes of rescue, haven't they?
Yeah. The great hope that had been there for ever since the Reformation, that England would be invaded by Catholic Spain or another great Catholic power, and the old faith, the Catholic faith, restored, that is running out of road by 1603, 1604. Because even though Catholics are sending secret missions to talk to the Spanish, to try to persuade them, to support them, to perhaps land an army, another armada, the world is moving towards peace. The burden of this war between Spain and England is too much for both countries, particularly England. When James comes to the throne, he calls this a great and tedious war. The taxes, the costs of this war had been sort of, creating a huge debt for Elizabeth's England. And Spain equally just wanted this war over. And there is a conference, the famous Somerset House Conference, where negotiators from both sides meet for several weeks, and the Treaty of London, signed in August 1604, is the result. The 19 years of war between England and Spain are to come to an end, and among the many clauses of the Treaty of London, one is missing, which is a clause to offer toleration to English Catholics.
Now, up until that point, right, the Catholics are continuing to kind of look for signs of hope and to see what they want to see, because they had thought until the peace treaty that maybe the fact of peace meant that James was preparing to convert, which they've wanted to believe he was doing for a long time.
Yeah, these are people who've lived under the oppression of Elizabeth's reign, and they had convinced themselves for several years now that things would be better under James, and so they start to see what they want to see. They start to even interpret things that are going in the opposite direction. Maybe within this is the moment we're waiting for, when this burden will be lifted from our shoulders. But even the Catholic agents who are making secret trips to Spain to try to talk to the Spanish, to try to get support from the Spanish, they are coming back reporting that they can sense that the desire for peace is just too strong amongst the Spanish. Peace is in everyone's interest, and the fate of England's Catholics is no longer a priority.
And not even for the Spanish, right? So basically Spain also has a much larger motivation. So none of them really cares about a handful of English Catholics. They just don't matter enough.
There are other considerations that are just more important for both of these nations. They both need peace. They both need to rebuild their finances. They both want the burden of this war taken off them. And the Spanish want to spend their energies fighting the Protestants in the lowlands, in the Netherlands, not fighting the English. They want a free reign to conduct that war without the English being involved.
So at this point, then, the kind of final hopes for James maybe bringing in a change of policy toward Catholics, those final hopes are dying. And the Catholic minority in England is actually seeing that the prosecution and persecution is continuing.
Yeah. Everything is continuing. The hunting down of priests isn't going to stop. The fines have been reimposed, which means that the wealth of those Catholic families, those Catholic gentry families, the recusants, they're being chipped away at. Young men are looking at the fortunes that they will one day inherit and seeing it being siphoned off to the state because of their fathers' and their parents' refusal to adhere to the new religion. And what happens is that this sense of despondency starts to morph into a radicalism, that what is desired no longer is toleration, it is a sense of revenge. And from a small group of wealthy gentry Catholic families, among the recusants, the hardliners, they come to the conclusion that they've tried everything. They've given everything a go. All of the peaceful options have been attempted and they've been exhausted. And it is from that group of entitled, wealthy, educated, and despairing, angry young men that the Gunpowder Plot is to emerge.
So, join us after the break as the plot begins to take shape. So, on Sunday, the 20th of May, 1604, 5 men from these recusant families met in London at the Duck and Drake Inn. And we think that was somewhere off the Strand in London.
That was somewhere very close to where we are right now. We don't know exactly where it was. I was just getting off the tube to come here to record this. And in Charing Cross Tube is the famous picture of the Gunpowder Plotters. There's also the picture of the Somerset House Conference that brings peace in 1604. So this is, the reason that's on the tube is because this is exactly, geographically, this is where the plot emerged. The streets on this land, this is where these meetings were held.
So we're at ground zero for the Gunpowder Plot.
Yeah,
right
exactly.
Here.
Yeah. And those 5 men were Guy Fawkes, obviously, Thomas Percy, Tom Winter, and Jack Wright. But the undoubted leader, the key character in this story, is a guy called Robert Catesby. And in some ways, history's been unjust to Catesby in a strange way, because if this plot had been successful, it would not be known as the Guy Fawkes plot. It would be known as the Catesby plot. He is undoubtedly the driving force, the central character. It is an accident of history. It is because of that great cinematic moment when Fawkes is discovered with the gunpowder under Parliament, with the kind of match and the timer and his spurs on ready to flee. That is the moment that imprints Guy Fawkes as the central character on this story. But actually, it is unquestionably Robert Catesby.
So tell us about Robert Catesby.
So he's in his early 30s. We often say these are young men. They're youngish, but they're in their early 30s. He's from one of these wealthy, recusant families, Catholic hardliners in the Midlands. Now, he married a Protestant woman, but when she died, something kind of happened. He became more committed to his Catholic faith, the faith he'd been brought up in. He was someone who'd been involved in the Earl of Essex's rebellion in 1601, which was the last of many attempts to depose Queen Elizabeth I. And he'd actually survived that plot, unlike Essex. He'd been arrested and he'd been given a very heavy fine. That means he was on the radar of Robert Cecil, Elizabeth and James I's Secretary of State, the great spy master. He was one of those so-called principal papists who was in the files of Cecil's secret police, that he was actually rounded up when Elizabeth was on her deathbed because Cecil wanted those guys in the Tower to keep an eye on them because he thought if a plot's going to come from anyone, it's people like Robert Catesby. So they knew who he was. He's under suspicion. Yeah. He's someone they are viewing with great suspicion. We know from later confessions that in June 1603, Thomas Percy, another of the plotters, had visited Catesby. They moved around between family homes, these rich families. Percy was at that meeting incensed by the betrayal by King James, and the two of them spoke about their anger, and they spoke about killing the king. Now,
just saying those words out loud can put you on the scaffold in 1604, right? So even to risk saying it, even in a private home, suggests already that you're deadly serious.
Yeah.
Because you don't take that risk just to shoot your mouth off.
No, and it shows that they trust each other and they can have these conversations in front of each other. But Catesby takes it a step further. He hints that he's devising a plan, not just that they're expressing their anger. He's not just getting it out. He says he's got a plan. He told Percy, "I am thinking of the surest way and will soon let thee know what it is." There's also something about the character of Robert Catesby that I think makes this story understandable. He was, by every account, incredibly charismatic. He is Hollywood casting. He's about 6 foot tall, very tall for the time. He's an excellent swordsman. He's said to be very good looking. And many people who knew him, they express a kind of affection for him. Ambrose Rookwood, who's another of the plotters, said in his trial that he loved and respected him, Catesby, as his own life. And without somebody as charismatic as Catesby, it's almost impossible to imagine that a plot this ambitious could have got anywhere, close to fruition. He's the mastermind. He is the secret network builder. He is the man with the vision.
It's really striking as you say that. It's so cinematic sounding, as you say. It's really amazing that Hollywood hasn't actually, because as far as I know, there aren't any movies about Catesby, but it's kind of, as you say, central casting or waiting to happen. Tall, handsome, charismatic, mastermind builder of the secret network. It doesn't end that well for him, but it's a great story. So
yeah, he is the key figure, but Fawkes is the man caught red-handed. And so history remembers Fawkes. And of the 5 men who met at the Duck and Drake pub, Fawkes is in some ways the outsider. He's not one of these young sons of these rich gentry recusant families in the Midlands, but he is the man with all of the skills that the plotters need. And in the end, he's going to be the fall guy. We know quite a lot about Fawkes. He was born in York in 1570 or around 1570. His father was a Protestant.
And his father was a Protestant who had taken the oath of supremacy, accepting the Church of England. So he was raised at first as a Protestant.
That's right, yeah. But when his father died, his mother remarried, and the new husband was a Catholic, a recusant. And Fawkes, as a boy, seems to have gravitated very strongly towards the faith of his stepfather. He went to school in York, St. Peter's School, and there he met 2 of the men who were later to be also members of the plot, Jack Wright and his brother Kit Wright. These are history's other Wright brothers.
Oh, I never thought of that.
And Jack was at the meeting at the Duck and Drake. Kit joins the plot later. So 3 of the 13 plotters, the Wright brothers and Fawkes, were school friends. But it's about his skills and his identity, or his lack of an identity, that makes Fawkes so important. By 1605, he had been fighting in Flanders in the wars between the Protestant rebels of the Low Countries and the Spanish for a decade. He'd been fighting on the side of Catholic Spain. It was actually in Flanders that Fawkes was recruited into the plot. He's a soldier. He understands explosives. He understands weapons. He's familiar with how to detonate explosives. These are really important skills, but he has another advantage, which comes from the fact that it is over 10 years since he was in England, which is that no one knows who he is. London is 200,000. That's its population in 1600. It's a really, really small world, and kind of everyone kind of knows everybody. You know, I live in Bristol, which is like a city of 500,000. It feels like everyone knows each other. This is a small world, and he's a face that no one knows. Now, the other plotters, particularly Catesby and Thomas Percy, they are on the radar of the spy network of Robert Cecil. They can't wander around without people wondering what they're doing. They don't know whether they're being watched. Fawkes has an anonymity, which is just almost as valuable to the plotters as his abilities with explosives. And we focus on that. Oh, he's a soldier. He knows how to use explosives. The fact that he's a face that doesn't trigger any alarm bells is equally as important.
So he can go about the business of the actual plot itself without drawing any attention.
Yeah,
he can amass tons of gunpowder and nobody's going to notice.
Yeah. The others are, that phrase that was used when Elizabeth was on her deathbed. They are the principal papists. They are the people the authorities are keeping an eye on. Fawkes is a nobody. Going back to that meeting at the Duck and Drake, Thomas Percy set the tone at the beginning of the meeting. He said, "Shall we always, gentlemen, talk and never do anything?" And then Catesby laid out his plan. Having given up on all other hopes, really, they are at the end of their tether. They feel that all other options are being closed up to them. And so Catesby's plan, in his own words, is to blow up the Parliament House with gunpowder. He just says it. That's what we're going to do.
I remember when I first learned about the plot, and there's such a kind of, for me anyway, the first and obvious question is, why aren't you blowing up Protestant churches or something? How is Parliament actually going to turn England Catholic again? We'll talk about this over the course of the story. Obviously, it's an important part of how it all plays out. But it's sort of hard not to ask the question even at the beginning of why is Parliament the target?
Catesby answers exactly that question. He says in his kind of beautiful 17th century English, "In that place have they done us all the mischief, and perchance God hath designed that place for their punishment." All of the Catholic laws have come from Parliament. God has ordained that is where the target for us to strike back. It's a kind of astonishingly kind of powerful phrase. There's a kind of thunderous kind of glamour to the language that Catesby uses.
Well, it is the language of 17th century England, and it's captured in the King James Bible. It's captured very much in Shakespeare. It does sound like Shakespeare. That could be a line from Shakespeare. It's practically in blank verse. And of course, it's 1604. Shakespeare is getting ready to write Macbeth and King Lear, both of which will be performed in 1606. And there's a wonderful account by our mutual friend James Shapiro in his book 1606, where he talks about the ways in which the Gunpowder Plot clearly were shaping Shakespeare's imagination in those plays. And we can hear these lines as if this could be part of Macbeth.
Yeah,
definitely.
If you're a dramatist and this story actually happens in the city you live in and you aren't kind of drawing from it, then you're in the wrong profession.
Yeah, exactly. Find another job.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds and it reads like Shakespeare because it is of the world Shakespeare's part of.
You were just quoting Catesby there verbatim in that 17th century English, but we have an account from the time where we get that language from.
Yeah, and much of what we know comes from the confessions that were later given, particularly the confession of one of the plotters, Thomas Wintour. And we can deduce from that Wintour, understandably, his reaction to what Catesby was suggesting was shock. He was alarmed. In his confession, he said that Catesby told me the nature of the disease required so sharp a remedy. That's why it had to be Parliament. And the fact that he's saying this requires a sharp remedy is because Wintour has responded by kind of saying what anyone would say, like, what the fuck? I mean, he's shocked. He goes on to say, and asked me that Catesby asked him if I would give my consent. So he's expressed his alarm, and Catesby's saying, will you go along with this? Wintour in his confession says, I told him yes. In this or what else soever, if he resolved upon it, I would venture my life. There again is the magnetism of Robert Catesby.
Yeah. So his responses are, you're out of your mind. And then Catesby says, are you with me? And he says, I will follow you anywhere.
Yeah, even to death. It's hard not to speculate, and we'll always wish that we knew more. But what is it about this young man who was able to convince these others to embark upon something so incredibly dangerous, so incredibly violent, and to risk their lives? Because they are, at this moment, they're committing treason and they are going down a path from which there is no return. This is an event that is to change history. And they not only discuss it, they not only agree it at this meeting, they take an oath of silence, a conspiratorial oath.
But Wintour's fears are entirely rational, right? I mean, he's absolutely right, of course, as history will show. And yet, very quickly, that is overcome. He takes an oath with the plotters, and then they sanctify it, don't they? Yeah.
They then go into another room where the Jesuit priest, Father Gerard, is waiting for them, and they take Holy Communion, of course, in secret. And what this means now is that they've met, the plan has been discussed, they have sworn an oath, the clock is ticking towards what would have been, and what very nearly was, the greatest act of terrorism in British history. I mean, some people say, is it anachronistic? Is it a bit much to call it terrorism? I mean, this is terrorism.
It's the definition of terrorism.
Yeah.
Right?
Within 1 year, 8 months and a couple of weeks of this meeting, everybody, all 5 men who had sat around that table at the Duck and Drake Inn would be dead, as would the other 8 men who were later to join the plot.
So I think we need to leave them there, having sworn their oath. They are in the Gunpowder Plot. As you say, the clock is ticking. And I feel like there's a countdown here to our next episode, but I'm not going to make it work. So I'm just going to ask people to join us next time as we learn how the plotters put their plan into motion and how close they came to pulling it off.